There were more protests in Belgrade against the government of Slobodan Milosevic following similar protests in 91-92, and anti-war leader Vuk Drašković and his wife Danica were both arrested. Drašković had been particularly vocal in his condemnation of the siege of Vukovar in the winter of 91-2 and had called on all inhabitants of Bosnia, whatever their ethnic background, to reject the lure of nationalism. The Draškovićes were reportedly beaten so badly by the police on their arrest that they needed hospital treatment and while there went on a hunger strike. After 10 days and near death, the couple were pardoned and released, Milosevic saying he personally considered them guilty but was releasing them so as not to make his government look bad. There was change aplenty at the top across Latin America. In Guatemala, President Jorge Serrano, in power since 1991, attempted to suspend the constitution, dissolve Congress and the Supreme Court, and take control of national life, in order to fight corruption, naturally, and was chased out of the country following protests, being replaced by his vice president Gustavo Espina, who had also been involved with the attempted seizure of power, so he was replaced in turn by Ramiro de Leon, the former national human rights attorney. In Venezuela, Carlos Andrés Pérez was impeached for embezzling 250 million bolivars and stripped of his immunity from prosecution. He refused to resign, but was ousted after an attempted coup led by Lieutenant Colonel Hugo Chavez. The new president appointed by Congress was Ramon Velázquez, a widely respected former journalist and lawyer who would stay in power for about a year until new elections. And, this one actually following an election, the centre-right revolutionary nationalist movement won the Bolivian election in coalition with the indigenous Tupac Katari Liberation Party. The new president, Gonzalo Sanchez de Lozada, was supported by Victor Hugo Cárdenas, the first person of indigenous Aymari descent to be vice president in Bolivia. 2 stalwarts of British comedy died on successive days. On the 10th of June, entertainer Les Dawson, known for both his deliberately bad piano playing and his wide-ranging repertoire of mother-in-law jokes, died of a heart attack during surgery for a heart complaint. And the following day, Bernard Bresslaw, a regular in the Carry On film series, also had a heart attack, in his case in the Green Room at the open-air theatre in Regent's Park, where he was about to play Grumio in The Taming of the Shrew. And in a famous case that highlighted the problem of coastal erosion, the Holbeck Hall Hotel in Scarborough, on the Yorkshire coast of eastern England, fell into the sea. The hotel had been built in 1879, and erosion had been bringing the cliff edge closer and closer over the years, and when a landslide took most of the garden in one go, the TV cameras arrived and the hotel was evacuated. The chimney stack collapsed live on TV, and the remainder was pulled down for safety reasons as the entire national media watched on. Over in the US, the Milwaukee 200 took place between the Monaco and Canada races, with Round 6 in Detroit scheduled for the same day as the F1 race in Montreal. Raul Boesel took his first pole position, breaking the lap record, and led off the start, chased by the Penskes, and held the lead after the restart after Stefan Johansson came a cropper bringing out the yellows. A charging Scott Goodyear got past Fittipaldi in traffic, then set about the leader, only to be stopped in his tracks when David Codreva's engine went bang and brought out the yellows again. Mansell, meanwhile, had made his way up into third, and Mario Andretti stopped from fifth to have a troublesome engine looked at. Scott Goodyear retired from second with a blown engine on lap 113, leaving his compatriot Paul Tracy not only leading but having lapped the entire field, only to get tangled up in Adrian Fernandez's accident and retire, leaving Boesel back in the lead chased by Mansell, who dodged through the inside on lap 181 and went on to win by a nose from Boesel, who went up to second in the championship ahead of Fittipaldi, third on the day and in the table. In Paris, the FIA's General Assembly met to decide the future structure of the organisation and approved Max Mosley's plan. FISA would be dissolved and reabsorbed into its parent organisation, which would then split into 2 equal parts, each with its own World Council, one for motorsport and one for tourism. That would encompass motoring organisations like the British AA and RAC, the German ADAC and so on. Overseeing them both would be an 8-member Senate. The General Assembly elected, unopposed, Max Mosley as president of the FIA, with Bernie Ecclestone as his vice president. Cesar Torres, a close friend of Jean-Marie Balestre, would head the Sporting Council, and Balestre himself would chair the Senate. All this would come into effect in October, and the plan to outlaw all electronic driver aids in F1 was reiterated, much to the dismay of engineers like Bernard Dudot and Gerard Ducarouge. The teams all arrived at the Circuit Gilles Villeneuve, which had just signed a new contract keeping both the race and title sponsorship from Molson until 1997, with an increase of about 10% in pre-sold tickets, with general manager Norman Legault put down to the presence of Michael Andretti, and presumably the lack of a US Grand Prix this year to support him at. There were some updates to the cars. The two Ferraris now featured a new evolution of the V12 engine with telescopic intake trumpets, while Tyrrell still didn't have their 021 chassis ready. It was being put through its paces at Silverstone by Eric van der Poel, but did have a new active suspension setup on the existing car. Gary Anderson and co. had burned the midnight oil, fixing numerous problems with the Jordan 193, with a new front wing, gearbox and automatic clutch, while both they and Minardi had new traction control systems, and the Lolas had been shortened by about 6 centimetres in the hope of improving road holding. As practice began, the McLarens found they were struggling on the track, both thanks to a series of technical glitches, but also a general lack of manoeuvrability and performance. The traditional raft race on the Olympic rowing lake resulted in the now traditional Jordan victory. They'd won it every year since arriving in the sport in 1991, while Fabrizio Barbazza caused a bit of a stir by catching an enormous fish, variously reported as either a carp or a pike, in his downtime. After Le Rousse's 100th Grand Prix in Monaco, it was the turn of their long-serving driver Philippe Alliot to celebrate his century in Canada. Talking to French TV, he discussed his improved performances in 1993 over his previous stint at F1, saying his 2 years driving Peugeot sports cars had helped him learn to improve his focus, which had been his main problem. His compatriot Alain Prost was coming in for a lot of criticism from the French media too. After 6 rounds of a championship he'd been expected to walk, he was second in the standings and had looked anything but the infallible calculating professeur. In particular, he seemed to be struggling with his starts in the era of semi-automatic gearboxes and launch control, and had either been too slow or too quick most of the time. He was also finding the atmosphere of the Williams team very different to McLaren. He'd felt that Ron Dennis's team were more like an enthusiastic, warm family firm, while Williams was too cold and professional, an engineering company that does motor racing, in his words, all of which was definitely at odds with the public perceptions of the two teams. Meanwhile, Senna, who had won in 1988 and 1990, as opposed to Alain Prost, who'd never won in Canada, and now had his contract for the rest of the season sorted, looked much happier and relaxed. Ayrton had been seen talking to Ferrari, but that seemed to be more about 1994 and putting pressure on Williams than for the remainder of this year. Friday qualifying would end up determining the grid because Saturday was so hot that times dropped, and whatever problems Prost was having in races, he broke a new record by taking his 7th consecutive pole position at the start of the season, nearly a full second faster than Senna's record time set with 18-inch rear tyres last year, with Hill back on form alongside him on row 1. The second row was all yellow and green, Benetton's best performance so far this year, with Schumacher ahead of Patrese by just 15/100ths, and then the Ferraris having their best qualifying so far, sharing row 3, though Alesi had to switch back to the older engine after blowing his new one. The McLarens just couldn't get their settings right, and Senna had his worst grid start since 1985, down in 8th, behind Brundle, and followed by a Sauber-Ligier-Sauber sandwich, and then Andretti in 12th. Comas beat his teammate Alliot after the centenarian had a suspension collapse, while Barrichello pronounced himself happy with the new Jordan in 15th. The low tie was struggling too, with active suspension problems and Zanardi having a brake failure, while Tyrrell's active suspension didn't keep Katayama out of the wall, and it was Michele Alboretto's turn to miss out at the back. And then on Saturday, the stewards dropped a bombshell. Following a report by Charlie Whiting, it was announced that of the 26 cars present, 24 were in contravention of the current technical regulations. Specifically, Article 1.3, which says that the driver must control the steering and propulsion, which was being broken by anyone with traction control, and Article 3.7, which prohibits any part of a racing car that exerts an aerodynamic influence from being mobile in relation to the suspended portions of the assembly, which covered active suspension. Only the Scuderia Italia team's low-tech Lolas didn't have either of those two systems, but given the impact that disqualifying everyone else would have, the stewards agreed that the rest could race under sufferance and the whole matter was referred to the FIA. All of which was, of course, interpreted by everyone concerned as a political gambit by the Mosley-Eccleston-Balestra party, aimed primarily at Williams and McLaren, the two big supporters of electronic aids. Ron Dennis was typically blunt, saying that while he appreciated the idea of reducing costs, the whole anti-electronics crusade was a clear attempt to just handicap the top teams, and anyway it wouldn't work because they'd just spend the money coming up with some other advantage that would end up being the next big regulation controversy. But that was all to worry about for the future. For now there was a race to run in the blistering heat, with one tyre stop expected for most drivers. There was more woe for McLaren as Michael Andretti's battery was flat, and he had to be pushed off the dummy grid into the pits, and then the rest were ready to go. The lights went green and away they went, Prost again a trifle slow on the power, allowing Hill to take the lead, while Schumacher also had a bad start and dropped back as Senna went the other way, moving up to 6th and battling Patrese for 5th. He took it part way round the lap, so it was Williams, Ferrari, McLaren, Benetton, Ligier, Benetton, as Schumacher attacked Brundle, who in turn attacked Patrese. A charging Senna went wheel-to-wheel with the Lazy through several corners before finally emerging in 4th place, which is where he finished the lap behind Hill, Prost and Berger. He overtook the Austrian at the hairpin next time around to make it 5 positions gained in 2 laps, which was up there with the famous Lap of the Gods at Donington. As the two Williamses ran nose to tail, Andretti finally left the pits 2 laps down, with little chance of doing much more than getting a bit more practice in. Schumacher was moving up too, passing Patrese on lap 2, then taking 5th off a Lazy at the last chicane on lap 3, and starting to pressure Berger. So the top 11 at this point were Hill, Prost, Senna, Berger, Schumacher and Lazy in the points, then Patrese, Brundle, Wendlinger, Blundell and Leto, 2 cars each from 5 teams, plus Senna. Prost set a fastest lap as he ran right behind Hill, then nipped through on the inside at the hairpin on lap 6, and shortly afterwards Schumacher got past Berger while the world was watching a replay of the Prost overtake. The Canadian broadcaster had cheekily used a little graphic of a number 27 Ferrari to come out of replays, so we all got another one of Schumacher going up to 4th. Prost was now motoring, already lapping Ukio Katayama, who'd had to come in for a new nose after running into the back of Warwick at the start. The footwork had also had to come in for new tyres, having been punctured in the incident, and would therefore be next on Prost's list, while Senna was gaining on Hill. Philippe Alliot's 100th Grand Prix was cut short after just 8 laps when his gear lever came off in his hand, while Badoer came in for new boots after an off-camera fracas with Boutsen. And then the other Jordan was pulling off, Barrichello's Hart engine having died when he changed gear, and he parked it in the grass. The Ferraris were still running line astern in 5th and 6th, with Patrese and Brundle still in touch, followed by a Sauber sandwich of Wendlinger, Blundell, Leto in 9th through 11th places, at least until Mark got it all wrong at the first chicane and backed it into the wall and out of the race. Senna, meanwhile, was still chasing Hill, but Damon seemed able to keep him about a second behind, while Prost continued going faster every lap. On lap 16, a Lazy bullied his way past Berger at the hairpin as the pair approached the struggling Warwick. After the pairs coming together at Monaco, they nearly did it again, no doubt to the dismay of Luca di Montezemolo. As Jean headed off in pursuit of the leaders, Berger had Patrese, Brundle and now Wendlinger looming large in his mirrors. Patrese, having his best race yet for Benetton, was all over the back of the number 28 Ferrari when not fending off the man he'd controversially replaced at Benetton, Martin Brundle. The effort was all too much for a Lazy's Ferrari V12, busting a coolant line and pulling off, CBC's graphics being the only number 27 Ferrari that would be in evidence for the rest of the day. Prost went past De Cesaris and set about lapping Michael Andretti, who was chasing Barbazza, while behind them, Hill and Senna threaded their way past Zanardi. Schumacher was gaining on the pair too, but on lap 29 the German was the first of the front-runners to make a tyre stop, with plenty of time for a leisurely 7.2 seconds without losing 4th place, as Suzuki and Katayama also came in. Next time round, Hill peeled in, but he'd misread his pit board and the crew were expecting Prost, and it took a while to swap to Hill's tyres, and then the left front wouldn't go on, and he was stationary for nearly 17 seconds before he rejoined behind Schumacher in 4th, as Berger came in for a much slicker stop. Then it was Senna, only slightly slower than Berger but still second, so just Prost of the leaders yet to stop as half-distance approached. He had a 30-second gap over Senna, so plenty of time, but didn't seem in any hurry to come in. Finally, on lap 34, with Senna charging on fresh rubber, Prost made his stop. A cautious stop and getaway, sufficient to get him back out in the lead by 13 seconds, as Michael Andretti made his own. So, with the pit stops mostly shaken out, on lap 34 of 69, Prost led Senna, then Schumacher just 2.5 seconds behind the McLaren, then Hill another 6 seconds back, with Wendlinger and Patrese both with big gaps either side. And although Senna and Schumacher were both pushing, the action was now taking place more on the timing sheets than visibly on the track, as Wendlinger was the last of the top 6 to make his stop, returning to the track 9th behind Leto. Patrese, suffering from leg cramps, clouted a barrier under pressure from Berger and came in for a new nose, which the Benetton crew managed in under 15 seconds, but still dropped him to 12th, as his teammate Schumacher continued to reel in Senna. De Cesaris was out with the failure of the new Tyrrell active suspension at the first braking point on lap 49. Senna had closed up a little on Prost as the Frenchman made his way through traffic, only to happen upon a cluster of cars himself, lapping both Saubers and putting an extra lap on Warwick, despite the Brits' best efforts, and Boutsen, while Leto had lost both third and fourth gears and was forced to watch Wendlinger disappear into the distance with the last point. Patrese, his leg cramps getting worse rather than better, came in to retire on lap 52, by which time Schumacher, with a clear track in front of him, had pulled to within 3 seconds of Senna and set fastest lap. While chasing him, Hill's engine was starting to splutter, so he decided to dial things back and just try and make it to the finish. Hill was not the only one with engine problems. Senna's alternator was beginning to play up now, with only just over 10 laps to go, and Schumacher was gaining hand over fist, and was soon right on the McLaren's tail. A thrilling finish was on the cards, at least until lap 63, when Senna's Ford just cut out entirely, surprising Schumacher, who nearly ploughed right into the back of him, instead managing to go round but clipping the corner of the McLaren, fortunately not hard enough to break anything on his own car. Senna toured off, no points today, and Prost cruised around the last few laps to win his first Canadian Grand Prix, just over 14.5 seconds ahead of Schumacher, with Hill, the last man on the lead lap, 53 seconds behind his team leader, to take another podium finish and another 4 points. Berger, Brundle and Wendlinger made up the rest of the scorers. Little Alpine country's best result since Italy 1984, a race won by Niki Lauda, with Joe Gartner 5th and Gerhard Berger 6th, in just his second race in F1. On that occasion, though, neither Gartner nor Berger had been registered to score points, so only Niki actually counted. Leto brought his Sauber home 7th with 2 missing gears, and there were still 17 cars running at the end, with Senna classified 18th, so he actually ended up behind his teammate Michael Andretti, who slogged away to finish 14th and 3 laps down. A 10-point swing saw Prost back on top of the drivers' standings, with both Hill and Schumacher gaining on Senna, and Michael additionally closing to within 2 points of Damon. The French Grand Prix was next in 3 weeks' time, with plenty of politicking to go on in between. Nobody really expected the FIA to throw every team except Scuderia Italia out of the championship, whatever Beppe Lucchini might hope, but exactly what the situation would be when the transporters rolled into Magny-Cours was anybody's guess. And so they all flew back from Canada. Landing back in London on Monday morning, BBC co-commentator James Hunt phoned his girlfriend of 4 years, Helen Dyson, and proposed. He'd kept the relationship secret, but it was Dyson's influence that had seen him clean up his health and take up cycling, as anyone who'd nearly knocked him off his bike around Wimbledon could attest. Then he went to bed and never woke up. At just 45 years old, he died of a massive heart attack in his sleep on the morning of the 15th of June. The 1976 world champion had been one of motor racing's great characters, both on and off the track. He would forever remain most famous for his championship year and his duel with Niki Lauda, of course, which became the subject of one of the 2 great movies so far set in the F1 world, 2013's Rush. His F1 career had lasted just 5 full seasons, from 1974 to 1978, though he'd made an immediate impact in 1973 when he entered 7 races for the new Hesketh team, scored points in 4 of them, including a 3rd at Zandvoort and a 2nd at Watkins Glen. Disillusioned with McLaren's awful 1978 car, he left for Walter Wolf Racing for 1979, but after 7 races with just 1 8th place finish to show for it, and still deeply affected by the death of his friend Ronnie Peterson at the end of 1978, he quit the team to be replaced by Keke Rosberg. There were occasional thoughts of a comeback. He was set to deputise in a McLaren for an injured Alain Prost at Long Beach in 1980 before breaking his leg skiing. Bernie Eccleston offered him $2.6 million to partner Piquet at Brabham in 1982, and he even attempted to get a seat at Williams for 1990 after getting into some financial trouble and got as far as testing before it all fell through. Offered a guest commentary spot at the 1979 British Grand Prix, Hunt turned out to be able to drive a microphone pretty well, and the rest is history. His casual, often distinctly unprofessional approach caused both the technicians and his colleague Murray Walker endless grief. With just 1 microphone between them, James had on at least one occasion simply yanked it out of Murray's hand when he wanted to talk, and his on-air commentary was frequently acerbic and outright critical of drivers such as Patrese, Jarier, De Cesaris and Alliot, who he thought were unworthy of being in the sport. But while the BBC may not have appreciated his choice of words every time, his dry wit and insights into Grand Prix racing earned him a whole new generation of fans who'd never even seen him race.